My sister's laugh cut through the banquet hall like a velvet-wrapped slap. She announced that I was not important loud enough for the entire VIP table to hear. I did not argue, standing still as if I belonged in the background. Then her fiancé turned and asked exactly one question, and I felt the room drop 20 degrees. It was not an awkward silence, but the terrifying quiet of a hidden truth, suddenly exposed to the light. My name is Leah Davis, and I have spent the better part of 3 decades learning how to be invisible. It is a specific skill, like holding your breath underwater or balancing a ledger in a room full of screaming people. You learn to stand just outside the rim of the spotlight, to wear colors that blend into the wallpaper, and to speak only when silence is no longer an option. Tonight, at the Waverly Grand Ballroom in Philadelphia, I was executing that skill to perfection. The air in the ballroom smelled of expensive lilies, roasted duck, and old money. Above us, 3 massive crystal chandeliers held court, refracting the light into 1,000 jagged diamonds that danced across the faces of Philadelphia's elite. There were over 400 people here, a sea of tuxedos and gowns that cost more than my first car. It was the annual Halebridge Civic Capital Gala, the kind of event where handshake deals determined the fate of entire city blocks and where charity was a contact sport. I stood near a pillar wrapped in white silk, holding a glass of sparkling water that I had no intention of drinking. I smoothed the fabric of my dress. It was a simple navy sheath, structured and tailored, bought off the rack, but altered by my own hands to fit perfectly. It was not a statement piece. It was camouflage. My sister, Sloane, was the statement piece. She was standing 20 feet away, directly under the center chandelier, radiating a gravitational pull that demanded attention. She wore a crimson gown with a neckline that plunged aggressively, the fabric shimmering like spilled wine. Clinging to her arm was Caleb Vaughn, her fiancé. Caleb looked the part of the trophy husband-to-be, tall, square-jawed, with the kind of polished anxiousness that comes from realizing you are merely an accessory. Sloane held his bicep with a grip that looked affectionate but was, I knew, purely territorial. She was steering him through the crowd, introducing him to donors and board members, playing the role of the benevolent socialite with the practiced ease of a predator. I watched her work the room. It was impressive, in a terrifying way. She laughed at jokes that were not funny. She touched arms. She leaned in close to whisper confidences that were likely fabricated. She was building her kingdom, one cocktail napkin at a time. Inevitably, her eyes swept the perimeter and landed on me. I saw the flicker of annoyance cross her face, quick as a camera shutter, before it was replaced by a plastic smile. She said something to Caleb, yanked on his arm, and began to cut a path toward me. The crowd parted for her. People stepped aside, not out of respect, but out of the instinctual need to avoid a collision. Leah! Sloane's voice was a bell, clear and dangerously bright. She reached me and made a show of air-kissing my cheek, careful not to let her makeup touch my skin. I am so surprised you actually came. I told Caleb you would probably stay home with your spreadsheets. Or was it a puzzle night? She turned to the group that had naturally formed around us. It was a cluster of mid-level donors and social climbers, the kind of people who fed off the energy of the loudest person in the room. Everyone, this is my little sister, Leah, Sloane announced, her hand gesturing to me as if I were a slightly embarrassing piece of furniture she couldn't get rid of. She is terribly shy. We usually leave her to handle the boring details while the rest of us handle the real work, right? A few people chuckled. It was that sharp, polite laughter that serves as social lubricant. They did not think it was funny, but they knew Sloane Davis was the fiancé of Caleb Vaughn and a self-proclaimed organizer of tonight's event. So they laughed. I did not flinch. I did not smile. I just looked at her. Hello, Sloane, I said. My voice was low, steady. The room looks beautiful. It does, doesn't it? She preened, smoothing her crimson skirt. I had to fight tooth and nail with the vendors to get these linens. You wouldn't understand the pressure. Leah, it takes a certain presence to get things done in this town. You know, you really should try to mingle. Although, she dropped her voice to a stage whisper, perfectly audible to the 6 people standing nearest to us. Maybe stick to the back tables? We wouldn't want you boring the VIPs with talk about zoning laws, or whatever it is you pretend to do. She laughed again. It was the sound of a velvet-wrapped slap. She's just a little bit of a tag-along, Sloane said to a woman in emerald silk, winking. But family is family, even the ones who aren't important. The words hung in the air. Not important. She said it with such casual cruelty, so confident in her assessment of my value. In Sloane's world, importance was measured in Instagram followers, gala invites, and how loud you could speak over others. By her metrics, I was a ghost. Normally, this was the part where I would look down, shuffle my feet, and fade away, validating her narrative. That had been our dynamic for 30 years. She was the star. I was the stagehand. But tonight was different. Tonight, I did not look down. I kept my chin level, I held her gaze, and more importantly, I let my eyes drift past her shoulder to the table directly behind her. It was Table 1, the gold sponsors, the men and women who controlled the pension funds, the housing grants, and the municipal bonds of Philadelphia. When Sloane had called me not important, a man at Table 1, Mr. Abernathy, a titan of commercial real estate, had stopped his fork halfway to his mouth. Next to him, the vice president of the city council had ceased chewing. A woman from the Heritage Trust turned her entire body around to look at us. The laughter from Sloane's circle was dying out, replaced by a confused murmuring. The air pressure in the immediate vicinity seemed to drop. It wasn't a dramatic gasp. It was a sudden, heavy stillness. The ambient noise of the party continued in the distance, but around us, a pocket of vacuum had formed. Sloane didn't notice. She was too busy admiring her reflection in Caleb's eyes. But Caleb noticed. Caleb Vaughn was a man who worked in risk management. I knew this because I had read his file. Just as I had read the files of everyone in this room. He made his living assessing threats, analyzing structural weaknesses, and predicting collapses before they happened. He was not the empty suit Sloane thought he was. He frowned, looking from Sloane's beaming, malicious face to my impassive one. Then he looked at Mr. Abernathy, who was staring at me with an expression of intense, respectful waiting. Caleb looked at the vice president, who was straightening his tie as if preparing to stand at attention. Caleb shifted his weight. He looked at me for the first time, really looked at me, not as Sloane's dowdy sister, but as a variable in the equation that didn't fit. "Sloane," Caleb said quietly. "What, darling?" She was still smiling, high on her own cruelty. "You said she is not important," Caleb said. His voice was not loud, but in the sudden vacuum of sound, it carried like a gunshot. "You said she is just a tag-along." "Well, she is," Sloane giggled, waving a hand at me. "Look at her. Caleb, she barely speaks." Caleb did not laugh. He took a half-step away from Sloane, as if instinctually creating distance from a blast zone. He looked me dead in the eye. "If she is not important," Caleb asked, and the question seemed to suck the remaining oxygen out of the circle. "Then why did the whole room just stop breathing when you insulted her?" Sloane blinked. The smile faltered, twitching at the corners. She looked around, finally sensing the change in temperature. She saw Mr. Abernathy watching. She saw the waiters pausing with their trays. She saw the way the guests at the neighboring tables had turned their backs on their own conversations to listen to ours. "Don't be silly," Sloane snapped, though her voice wavered. "They are just looking. Leah, tell him. Tell him you're nobody." She demanded it like a petulant child demanding a toy. "Tell him you're nobody." I looked at my sister. I looked at the fear starting to crack the porcelain finish of her confidence. I took a slow sip of my water. I set the glass down on a passing tray with a soft clink. "Because," I said. That was it. One word. No explanation. No defense. No rising intonation to turn it into a question. I did not shout it. I spoke it with the flat, absolute certainty of gravity, because the effect was instantaneous. At table 1, Mr. Abernathy stood up. He was a man of 80 years, with bad knees and a cane, but he stood up with the urgency of a soldier hearing a bugle. Beside him, the vice president of the city council rose as well, a woman from the Sovereign Wealth Fund, who had been mid-sip of her Cabernet, lowered her glass to the table and turned fully toward me, ignoring the person who had been speaking to her. The ripple effect spread. It wasn't just the VIPs. It was the staff, the floor manager, a woman named Elena, whom I had emailed 40 times in the last 3 weeks regarding the fire codes and seating charts. Snapped her fingers at a server and pointed toward me. Sloane looked like she was hallucinating. She spun around, her crimson dress flaring. "Why are they standing? Caleb, what is happening? Sit down," she hissed at a nearby donor. "Why are you looking at her?" The murmurs began to spark like a fuse. "That's her," someone whispered. "Is that the Davis woman?" another voice asked. "The strategist, the one from the memos." Then, the crowd parted again. This time, it was not the polite parting for a socialite in a red dress. It was the deferential parting for authority. Dorian Hale was walking toward us. Dorian was the CEO of Halebridge Civic Capital, the man whose name was on the building, the checks, and the city's skyline. He was 50 years old, wore a tuxedo that cost more than Sloane's entire wardrobe, and carried himself with the lethal grace of a man who owned everything he looked at. He had been surrounded by photographers and senators all night, inaccessible, a distant god on a mountaintop. But now he was moving with purpose. He walked straight past the mayor. He walked past the head of the Port Authority. He walked straight toward the silence that I had created. Sloane's face lit up with desperate hope. She assumed, in her infinite narcissism, that he was coming to rescue her, to validate her dominance. She stepped forward, blocking his path to me, extending her hand. "Dorian," she gushed, her voice pitching up an octave. "So glad you could make it over. I was just telling my fiancé how we—" Dorian Hale did not stop. He did not slow down. He did not even blink. He walked around Sloane as if she were a potted plant placed inconveniently in a hallway. He did not look at her extended hand. He did not acknowledge her voice. He stopped directly in front of me. The silence in the ballroom was now absolute. Even the string quartet seemed to have dampened their sound. Dorian looked me up and down, assessing. He saw the simple dress. He saw the lack of jewelry. He saw the calm in my eyes that matched his own. "You finally came," Dorian said. His voice was deep, warm, and loud enough for the first 3 rows of tables to hear clearly. I was beginning to worry we would have to start the presentation with a hole in the center of the stage. I nodded once. I had to ensure the final numbers on the housing compact were accurate. "Mr. Hale, the projections for the 3rd quarter needed adjustment before I could step away." "Always the architect," Dorian smiled. It was a genuine smile, rare and sharp. He turned then. He turned his back to me, standing shoulder to shoulder with me, facing the room. He faced Sloane, who was standing with her hand still extended, her mouth slightly open, looking like a statue of shock. He faced Caleb, who looked like he had just solved a complex riddle and was terrified of the answer. He faced the 400 guests who were watching with bated breath. Dorian placed a hand on my shoulder, a gesture of equality, of partnership, of immense endorsement. "Ladies and gentlemen," Dorian announced, his voice booming without a microphone. "I know many of you have spent the evening asking who is responsible for the miracle of the Harbor Light project. You have asked who designed the solvency model that saved us $30 million. You have asked who we are all here to support." He paused for effect. Sloane was trembling. I could see the vibrations in the hem of her dress. "I would like to introduce you to Leah Davis," Dorian said. "She is not just a guest. She is the person that everyone in this room is trying to impress tonight." The flashbulbs went off. The applause started from table 1 and rolled backward like a tidal wave. And in the center of it, I saw my sister's face crumble as the reality of her own insignificance finally, violently, crashed down upon her. The applause that washed over me felt strange, like wearing a coat that was 2 sizes too big. I did not crave it. I did not lean into it. For my sister, Sloane, applause was oxygen. It was the only thing that convinced her she existed, for me. It was just noise, a disruption to the data. I stood there, feeling the heat of 400 pairs of eyes, and my mind did not stay in the ballroom. It drifted back to the quiet, dusty corners of our childhood home in the suburbs, where the lines between us were drawn in permanent marker long before we ever put on evening gowns. Growing up, the Davis household operated on a simple, unspoken constitution. Sloane was the event, I was the logistics. It started when we were teenagers. Sloane was 2 years older, loud, vibrant, and terrifyingly socially adept. She was the kind of girl who could walk into a cafeteria and have 3 different tables waving her over before the door swung shut. She was homecoming queen. She was the lead in the spring musical. She was the one our parents talked about at dinner parties with a breathless sort of pride. Sloane is looking at acting schools. Sloane just got back from a leadership camp. I was the one who proofread her essays. I was the one who mapped out the driving routes for our family vacations so we would not hit traffic. I was the one who remembered to buy the batteries for the camera so our father could take pictures of Sloane receiving her awards. I remember one specific evening when I was 16. I was sitting at the kitchen table, buried under a pile of calculus textbooks. Sloane breezed in, smelling of vanilla body spray and entitlement. She was running for student body president, and her campaign was tanking because she had no platform, just popularity. She threw her backpack on the table. "Covering my homework. Fix it. Leah," she had said. Not asking, just instructing. "I need a slogan. I need a policy. Something that sounds smart but doesn't actually require me to do anything hard." I spent 3 hours writing her speech. I designed a recycling initiative that was cost-neutral for the school board. I created a peer tutoring credit system. Sloane won in a landslide. At the victory dinner, when my father raised a toast to her brilliance, to her vision, I waited for her to mention my name. I waited for a nod, a glance, anything. She beamed, raised her glass of sparkling cider, and said, "I just knew what the people wanted." She never looked at me, not once. That night, I learned the lesson that would define the next 20 years of my life. If you want to get things done, you have to be willing to let someone else stand on the stage. If you want to change the world, you cannot be addicted to the credit. So I retreated. I became the ghost in the machine. I embraced the label of being dry, boring, and unambitious. It was safer in the shadows. In the shadows, no one interrupts you. In the shadows, you can build empires while everyone else is busy fighting for the crown. That philosophy led me to Northlane Strategy Lab. Northlane is not a company that people recognize. We do not have billboards. We do not have a flashy Instagram account. We are a boutique consulting firm that specializes in the unsexy, headache-inducing world of municipal finance and community infrastructure strategy. We are the people cities call when they have run out of money and ideas. We are the people who figure out how to turn a derelict industrial park into a tax revenue generator without displacing the local population. My office at Northlane is quiet. It has a whiteboard that covers 2 walls, usually filled with complex equations and flowcharts. I deal in the hard currency of reality: risk assessment, bond yield curves, demographic shift modeling. It is dry work. It is exhausting work, but it is real. Sloane, predictably, went the other way. She went into public relations, a term she used loosely to cover a career of attending parties, organizing galas, and sitting on boards where her primary contribution was critiquing the font size on the invitations. She built a life on connections. She collected people like trading cards. Her job was to make things look good. My job was to make things actually work. We stayed in our lanes. We saw each other at holidays, where she would make passive-aggressive comments about my lack of a love life, and I would politely ask about her latest project, which usually involved spending other people's money on flower arrangements. Then came the Harbor Light Housing Compact. 18 months ago, the city was facing a crisis. The housing market had overheated, pushing working-class families out to the fringes. The mayor's office was desperate. They needed a solution that was not just a Band-Aid. They needed a structural overhaul of how affordable housing was financed. They called North Lane. They called me. I spent the last year and a half living inside the Harbor Light data. I designed a tiered investment structure that allowed private equity to invest in low-income housing with a guaranteed return subsidized by a complex mix of federal tax credits and municipal bonds. It was a delicate, intricate piece of financial engineering. It was the hardest thing I had ever done. It was my masterpiece. But because of the sensitive nature of the financial structuring, my involvement was covered by a strict non-disclosure agreement. The city did not want the public to know that a private strategy firm was rewriting their housing code until the funds were secured. They needed a face for the fundraising phase. They needed a chairperson of the gala committee. Enter Sloan. When I saw her name on the internal memo as the volunteer lead for the event, my stomach turned over. I knew exactly what would happen. She would take the title. She would dazzle the donors with her smile and her curated anecdotes. She would treat the Harbor Light project like another feather in her cap. Completely unaware of the thousands of hours of math that held the roof up, I had tried to stay away. I told myself it did not matter. The goal was to get the housing built. If Sloan wanted to play queen for a night, let her. The NDA meant I could not claim public credit anyway. I was prepared to stay home, order takeout, and watch the fundraising ticker climb online. But then, 3 days ago, I saw the budget draft for Phase 2. Phase 2 was the implementation phase. It was the part where we actually broke ground and started building, and in the preliminary vendor list that Sloan had forwarded to the committee, I saw names that did not belong. I saw consulting fees that were 3 times the industry standard. I saw a lack of oversight that made my skin crawl. Sloan was not just taking credit. She was steering the ship toward an iceberg. She assumed I would not come tonight. She assumed I was the same Leah who sat at the kitchen table doing her homework while she accepted the trophy. She thought I was safe. She thought I was not important. That was why I was standing here in my navy dress, holding a glass of water I would not drink. I was not here for revenge, not in the petty sense. I did not care about embarrassing her. I did not care about Caleb or his judgmental stare. I was here because the Harbor Light Housing Compact was mine. I had breathed life into it when it was just a messy spreadsheet. I had fought with zoning boards and tax attorneys for 18 months to make it viable. I was not going to let my sister turn my life's work into her personal piggy bank. The NDA had a clause, a specific, tiny clause on page 42 that I had insisted on. It stated that the lead strategist had the right to reveal their identity if the financial integrity of the project was compromised. Sloan calling me unimportant was the trigger, but the real weapon was the knowledge I carried in my head. I looked at Dorian Hale. He knew. He was the one man in this room who understood that without me, this entire gala was just people drinking expensive wine in a burning building. He had called me this morning, his voice tight. "Leah," he had said, "I think we have a problem with the vendor list. I need you there tonight. I need you to take the wheel." So when Dorian announced my name, when he told the room that I was the person they needed to impress, it wasn't just a nice introduction. It was a transfer of power. He was handing me the keys. I watched Sloane's face as the applause continued. I saw the confusion warring with the humiliation. She looked at Caleb, but he was staring at me. She looked at the donors, but they were clapping for me. She was alone in the center of the crowd. Stripped of her context, for the first time in our lives, the script had flipped. The dry sister, the one who lived by plans and spreadsheets, was the one holding the room captive. The sister who lived by the spotlight was blinking in the dark. I did not smile at her. I did not gloat. I simply nodded to Dorian, acknowledging the introduction, and prepared to do what I always did. I was going to fix the mess. I stepped forward, moving into the circle that Dorian had cleared for me. My heels clicked on the marble floor. A sharp, rhythmic sound that cut through the fading applause. I was not here to drink champagne. I was here to work. And the first item of business was ensuring that when Phase 2 began on Monday morning, Sloane Davis would be nowhere near the checkbook. The invisible woman had just become the only reality in the room. The energy in the Waverly Grand Ballroom had shifted, but the machinery of the gala continued to grind forward with the mindless persistence of a glacier. After Dorian's introduction, the shock of my sudden elevation had rippled through the room and then settled into a dull, vibrating tension. The ecosystem of high society charity does not stop for anything less than a fire alarm, and even then, people would likely finish their champagne first. I retreated to the edge of the room, positioning myself near a massive arrangement of white hydrangeas. From here, I could observe the rituals of the night unfold. A charity gala is a strange anthropological event. It is a place where the wealthiest people in the city gather to celebrate their own generosity while spending more on a single evening than the beneficiaries of their charity would earn in a decade. To my left, the silent auction was in full swing. It was a row of long tables draped in black velvet, laden with items that no one needed but everyone wanted to be seen buying. There was a signed electric guitar from a rock star who had been dead for 20 years. There was a week-long stay at a private villa in Tuscany. There was a diamond necklace that sat on a velvet bust like a coiled snake. I watched a woman in a silver dress hover over the bid sheet for the Tuscany trip. She held her pen with a manicured hand, glancing around to see if anyone was watching before she scribbled down a number. She was not thinking about the homeless families Harbor Light was built to serve. She was thinking about whether $5,000 was enough to outbid her neighbor, or if she needed to go to $7,000 to prove a point. It was a blood sport played with fountain pens. In the center of the room, the waiters were beginning to circulate with the second course. They moved with military precision, dropping plates of seared scallops in front of donors who were too busy networking to eat. And then there was Sloane. My sister had recovered from the initial blow of Dorian's announcement with the resilience of a cockroach. She had simply rewritten reality in her head within seconds. I watched her lead Caleb toward the table of the vice president of the city council. She was gripping Caleb's arm so tightly, I thought she might cut off his circulation. She was doing what she did best, which was spinning a narrative. I could see her laughing, tossing her head back, touching the vice president's shoulder with a familiarity that was entirely unearned. She was selling herself as the bridge, the connector. I could read her lips from 20 feet away. As a member of the organizing committee, she was saying, "We worked so hard to bring this vision to life." She was claiming ownership of the very event where she had just been publicly sidelined. It was breathtakingly delusional. Caleb, however, looked less convinced. He moved stiffly, his smile looking like it had been painted on by a shaky hand. He kept glancing over his shoulder, his eyes scanning the periphery until they found me. When our eyes met, he looked away quickly, as if he had been caught staring at the sun. I moved slightly closer, drifting through the crowd like smoke. I needed to hear the tone of the room. I needed to know if the money was real, or if it was just polite promises. 2 men in tuxedos were standing near me, swirling cognac in wide glasses. One was a developer I recognized from the zoning hearings last year. The other was a hedge fund manager. "It is a good cause," the developer said, sounding bored. "Harbor Light has good optics. The mayor is pushing it hard." "Optics are fine," the hedge fund manager replied, taking a sip. "But I need to know the tax implications. If I drop $50,000 tonight, can I write it off against the capital gains from the waterfront deal?" "Ask the Davis woman," the developer said. "Dorian says she built the structure. If she is the real deal, she will know how to hide the exposure." "I thought the sister was running the show." "The sister in the red dress?" The developer snorted. "She is decoration. The other one is the engine. You saw how Abernathy stood up for her. Abernathy does not stand up for decoration." I turned away, feeling a cold satisfaction settle in my chest. They did not care about the families. They did not care about the affordable housing units we were trying to build. They saw Harbor Light as a tax shelter and a PR opportunity. But at least they recognized who was driving the bus. I continued my circuit of the room. A man with gray hair and a face that looked like it had been carved out of granite stopped in his tracks as I approached. It was Arthur Sterling, one of the largest private philanthropists in the state. We had never met in person, but I had exchanged over 200 emails with his legal team regarding the endowment structure. He looked at me, his eyes narrowing slightly as he processed my face against the name Dorian had announced. He didn't smile. He didn't wave. He simply nodded. A sharp, distinct dip of his chin. It was a nod of recognition. It was the kind of look one general gives another across a battlefield. He knew who had rejected his initial offer because the yield was too low. He knew who had forced his lawyers to rewrite the liability clauses. He knew I was not unimportant. He turned back to his conversation, but his posture had changed. He was standing straighter. I found myself near the service entrance, a small alcove where the noise of the party was slightly muffled. I paused to check my phone. Scrolling through the real-time donation tracker, we were hitting our targets, but barely. Leah. I didn't turn around immediately. I knew the voice. It was Caleb. I slid my phone into my clutch and turned. He was standing there, looking like a man who had lost his map in a foreign country. Sloane was a few yards away, busy charming a senator's wife, oblivious that her fiancé had slipped her leash. "Hello, Caleb," I said. "Sloane told me you were a temp," he said. He didn't lead with a greeting. He just blurted it out, the confusion spilling over. "She said you were doing data entry for a nonprofit because you couldn't find a corporate job. She said you were struggling." I looked at him. He was a smart man, or at least a successful one, but he had fallen into the trap that so many people did. He believed the loudest voice in the room. "Sloane has a very active imagination," I said calmly. "It is one of her gifts." "Dorian Hale introduced you as the architect," Caleb said. His brow furrowed. "Mr. Abernathy stood up for you. People are talking about a strategy document you wrote like it is the Bible." He took a step closer. "Why did you let her talk to you like that? Why did you let her tell everyone you were nobody?" "Because it does not matter what Sloane says," I replied. "It matters what gets signed. It matters what gets built. I do not need a microphone to do my job." "Caleb?" He looked at me, really studied me, searching for the mousy sister he had been promised. He didn't find her. "She is lying, isn't she?" he whispered. "About more than just your job." Before I could answer, Sloane materialized. She didn't walk up. She swooped in, grabbing Caleb's arm and pulling him back toward her as if retrieving a wandering toddler. "There you are," she exclaimed, her voice shrill. She glared at me, her smile tight and dangerous. "Leah, I hope you aren't boring poor Caleb with numbers. He is here to have fun." "We were just catching up," Caleb said, his voice flat. "Well, come on," Sloane said, tugging him away. "The auction is about to close, and I want to make sure the senator sees us bidding on the safari package. It is good for your image, darling." She dragged him away. But Caleb looked back at me one last time. The doubt was no longer a crack. It was a canyon. I watched them go, but my attention was pulled away by a movement near the kitchen doors. Elena, the floor manager, was standing there holding a clipboard. She caught my eye. She didn't wave, but she raised her eyebrows and tapped her watch. It was a signal. "We are 5 minutes behind schedule for the speeches." She wasn't looking at Sloane, the organizer. She was looking at me. She knew who had approved the run of show. She knew who held the real authority. I gave her a nearly imperceptible nod, acknowledging the timing. She relaxed instantly and turned to bark orders at the waitstaff. The entire internal machinery of the event, the waiters, the sound technicians, the security detail, was operating on a frequency that Sloane couldn't even hear. They were looking to me. I scanned the room for Dorian. He was near the stage, surrounded by a wall of people trying to take selfies with him. He looked exhausted. Over the shoulder of a woman in a sequined dress. His eyes found mine. He held my gaze for 2 seconds. It was a reminder. Tonight is the night. He had told me on the phone yesterday. Phase 2 is a go. Leah, But we need to make sure the board is unanimous. If we pull this off tonight, you run the expansion. No more shadows." I looked away from him, my eyes drifting across the tables. The centerpieces were magnificent. They were towering arrangements of white orchids and silver branches, dripping with crystals. They were stunning. And they were wrong. I felt a prickle of cold at the base of my neck. I knew the budget for this gala down to the last penny. I had approved the line item for decor myself. We had allocated $15,000 for flowers. We had agreed on simple, elegant seasonal arrangements, local greenery, white roses. These were not white roses. These were Phalaenopsis orchids, imported, likely from Holland, and the crystals were not plastic. They were catching the light with the heavy, fractured brilliance of lead glass. I did a quick mental calculation. 80 tables. Each centerpiece had to cost at least $400. That was $32,000 just for the flowers on the tables. That was double the entire decor budget. Where did the money come from? I looked at the stage. The backdrop was a massive LED screen, high definition, displaying the Harbor Light logo in looping 4K motion. I had approved a standard projector screen. An LED wall of that size cost $20,000 to rent for the night. The appetizers were supposed to be bruschetta and tartare. Instead, I saw waiters passing trays of caviar and foie gras. The math was not adding up. We were a non-profit. Every dollar spent on the party was a dollar not spent on housing. I had set strict caps. Someone had overridden them. I looked across the room at Sloane. She was laughing at the senator's table, gesturing wildly. She looked triumphant. She looked like the queen of the ball. I remembered a conversation from 2 weeks ago. Sloane had called me. Unusually sweet. "Don't worry about the vendor details. Leah," she had said, "I have a friend who runs a great events company. I will handle the coordination. You just worry about the math. I will handle the coordination." My eyes narrowed. I looked at the program sitting on the cocktail table next to me. I flipped to the back page, where the sponsors and vendors were listed in small print. Event production design provided by Signature Halo Events. I had never heard of Signature Halo Events. We had a preferred vendor list, and they were not on it. I looked back at the centerpieces. The opulence was suffocating. It wasn't just bad budgeting, it was reckless. If the board found out we had blown $50,000 over budget on flowers and screens, the narrative of fiscal responsibility I had spent 18 months building would be destroyed. They would say we were just another wasteful charity. They would kill Phase 2. Sloane wasn't just spending money to look good. She was burning the foundation of the project to keep herself warm. I felt a vibration in my pocket. It was an email notification. I pulled out my phone. It was an automated alert from the accounts payable system, a system I still had administrative access to, even if Sloane didn't know it. Payment alert. Rush processing request. Vendor. Signature Halo Events. Amount. $184,000. My breath hitched. $184,000. That was nearly the entire operating budget for the event, and it was marked Rush. I looked at Sloane again. She wasn't just incompetent. She was dangerous. She was smiling, drinking champagne, and basking in the glow of a fire she had started with my money. I put the phone back in my clutch. My hand was trembling, not with fear, but with a cold, sharp anger. I wasn't going to let her burn Harbor Light down. I wasn't going to let her destroy the homes of 300 families just so she could have orchids and a video wall. Dorian was right. Tonight would decide everything, but he didn't know the half of it yet. I took a sip of water. It was cool and clean. I watched my sister laugh. Enjoy it. Sloane, I thought, enjoy the flowers, because you just bought them with your future. The lights in the ballroom dimmed, not gradually, but with a sudden, authoritative drop that forced the conversation to die in everyone's throats. The spotlight that had been dancing aimlessly across the ceiling snapped into focus, hitting the center of the stage with a blinding white intensity. The hum of 400 people, the clinking of silverware, the murmur of gossip, the shifting of chairs, evaporated. Dorian Hale stood at the podium, He did not tap the microphone. He did not clear his throat. He simply raised his champagne glass. It was a gesture of command, not celebration. He held it there, suspended in the beam of light, waiting until the silence was absolute, until the only sound in the room was the hum of the ventilation system. I stood near the hydrangeas, watching him. My heart was beating a slow, heavy rhythm against my ribs. I knew what was coming. I had written the talking points for this speech 3 days ago, sitting in my office at North Lane, drinking cold coffee. But reading the words on a screen was one thing. Hearing them spoken into a room full of people who had spent the last 3 hours ignoring me was another. "Thank you all for being here," Dorian said. His voice was deep, resonant, and stripped of the usual gala affectations. "Tonight, we have gathered to talk about the future of our city. We have talked about charity. We have talked about hope. But hope is not a strategy, and charity does not build foundations." He paused, letting the words settle. I saw heads nodding at the VIP tables. They liked this. They liked the idea that they were practical, not just generous. "For the past year," Dorian continued, "the Harbor Light Housing Compact has been a black box to many of you. You have seen the projections, you have seen the architectural renderings, but you have also asked questions. You have asked how we can guarantee solvency in a volatile market. You have asked who is ensuring that your investment does not disappear into the bureaucratic void." I saw Sloane near the front. She was beaming, nodding along as if she personally had drafted the risk mitigation protocols. She squeezed Caleb's hand, performing the role of the proud insider. "We have kept the leadership of this project quiet for a reason," Dorian said. "We needed the structure to be bulletproof before we put a name to it. We needed the math to be unassailable." He turned. His body pivoted on the stage, and his eyes searched the darkness of the room. He was not looking for the mayor. He was not looking for the cameras. He was looking for the pillar near the kitchen service entrance. He was looking for me. "Tonight, I am done with secrets," Dorian announced. "And I am done with the misconception that this project is run by committee. It is not. It is run by a singular architectural mind." He gestured with his glass, a sharp, sweeping motion that pointed directly at me. "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the lead architect and strategy director of the Harbor Light Housing Compact, the woman who designed the triple-lock bond structure that has already, as of 6 o'clock this evening, secured our funding goals for the next 5 years. Ms. Leah Davis." The spotlight swung. It moved across the room like a physical object, cutting through the darkness, blinding people as it passed, until it hit me. I blinked against the glare. For a second, I saw nothing but white. Then, my vision adjusted, and I saw the room. It was a tableau of shock. The applause did not start immediately. It was not the polite, scattered clapping that greets a minor functionary. It was a stunned silence, followed by a sudden, violent eruption of noise. But it was the faces that I watched. I saw Mr. Abernathy, the real estate titan, stand up again. This time, he didn't just stand. He turned his chair around completely to face me, clapping with his hands held high, a gesture of genuine respect. I saw the hedge fund manager I had overheard earlier, the one who wanted a tax shelter, drop his jaw. He looked from me to the stage and back again, realizing that the woman he had ignored near the bar was the only person in the room who could save him millions in capital gains taxes. And I saw Sloane. Sloane was frozen. She was standing next to Caleb, her hands poised to clap, but they had stopped midair. Her smile, which had been plastered on her face for the last 3 hours, was currently undergoing a catastrophic structural failure. It was stuck there, rigid and ghastly, like dried glue. Her eyes were wide, staring at me as if I were a ghost that had just crawled out of the floorboards. She looked at Dorian, waiting for the punchline. She waited for him to say, and also her sister, Sloane, who did the real work. But Dorian did not say that. "Leah," Dorian said, his voice booming over the speakers, "please, join me." I did not walk to the stage. I stayed where I was. I gave a small, controlled wave, just enough to acknowledge the room, but not enough to seem eager. I was not a performer. I was the director. Dorian smiled, understanding my refusal to perform. He turned back to the crowd. "I want to be clear about what this means," Dorian said, leaning over the podium. "Because of the financial structure Ms. Davis designed, we have not just met our goal, we have exceeded it. We are fully capitalized for Phase 1, and because of her negotiation with the Municipal Bond Authority, every dollar you donated tonight is matched 2-to-1 by the city. That deal exists because Leah Davis refused to leave the negotiating table for 14 hours straight." A murmur of awe rippled through the room. 14 hours, 2-to-1 match. These were numbers they understood. These were numbers that smelled like power. Suddenly, the dynamic of the room inverted. Before, I had been an obstacle to navigate around. Now, I was the destination. I saw the vice president of the city council lean over to his aide and whisper aggressively, pointing at me. The aide immediately pulled out a phone and started typing, likely clearing the vice president's schedule for a meeting with me tomorrow morning. I saw a woman from the Sovereign Wealth Fund, a woman who had literally stepped on my foot earlier without apologizing, start to push her way through the crowd toward me. She had a business card in her hand, holding it out like a weapon. "Ms. Davis," she called out, her voice sickly sweet. "Leah, I would love to discuss the yield curves you used for the bond structure." "Leah," another voice joined in, "do you have a moment to talk about the zoning implications?" They were swarming. The sharks had smelled blood, but this time, they weren't coming to eat. They were coming to follow. I looked at Caleb. He was standing next to Sloane, but he had pulled away from her physically. There was a foot of space between them now, a chasm that had opened up in the last 30 seconds. He was looking at Sloane with an expression of profound disorientation. "You said she was not important." I saw him mouth the words. Sloane flinched. She turned to him, her hands fluttering nervously. "Caleb, I didn't know the title. She never tells me anything. You know how secretive she is. It's just a title. Darling, it doesn't mean anything." "She secured a 2-to-1 match," Caleb said, his voice rising just enough for me to read the anger in his face. "Do you know what that means, Sloane? It means she just generated $10 million for this city while you were worrying about the color of the napkins." Sloane's face went pale. "Caleb, stop. People are looking." "Yes," Caleb said, looking at me. "They are looking at her. You said she was a nobody. You said she was embarrassed to be here." "She is," Sloane hissed. "Look at her dress. She doesn't fit in." "She is the only one who fits in," Caleb said. "Because she built the damn house." On stage, Dorian was not finished. He waited for the applause to die down again. He had one more card to play, and it was the card that I knew would cut the deepest. "There is one final announcement," Dorian said. "As we move into Phase 2, the construction and implementation phase, we need absolute integrity. We need a singular vision. The board has voted unanimously." He looked directly at Sloane. He didn't say her name, but he looked right at her. "Ms. Leah Davis will not only continue as strategy director," Dorian said, articulating every syllable. "She has been granted full executive authority over the selection of all vendors, contractors, and service providers for the duration of the project. No contract gets signed without her signature. No check gets cut without her approval." The silence returned, but this time it was different. It was sharp. It was dangerous. Vendor selection. In this room, that phrase meant money. It meant millions of dollars in construction contracts, catering gigs, logistics support, and security details. It meant that I was now the gatekeeper to the city's treasury for the next 5 years. And Sloane knew exactly what that meant. I saw her knees buckle slightly. She grabbed the back of a chair to steady herself. Her face went from pale to gray. She was thinking about signature halo events, She was thinking about the $184,000 she had tried to rush through the system. She was thinking about the consulting fees she had likely promised to her friends. She had thought she was safe because she was the organizer. She thought she could bury the invoices in the general fund, but Dorian had just announced that I was the one who checked the receipts. She looked at me across the room. Her eyes were wide with terror. It wasn't the terror of social embarrassment anymore. It was the terror of legal exposure. A man standing near the front, one of the strict board members. A retired judge, leaned forward. He had a glass of scotch in his hand, and he spoke to his neighbor in a voice that carried in the quiet room. "Full authority over vendors?" the judge murmured. "Interesting. If she is that strict with the money, then who approved the budget for tonight?" He gestured vaguely at the imported orchids in the massive LED wall. "This party costs a fortune," the judge continued, his brow furrowing. "If Davis is the financial hawk they say she is, this doesn't look like her style. Someone else must have had their hand in the till for this one." The whisper hung in the air. It was a spark landing in dry grass. People turned to look at the flowers. They looked at the expensive screens. They looked at the caviar. And then, slowly, inevitably, they looked at the woman in the red dress who had spent the entire night bragging about how she had organized everything. Sloane saw the looks. She saw the suspicion forming in their eyes. She realized that by claiming credit for the party, she had inadvertently claimed credit for the waste. I stood still. The investors were closing in on me. Their business cards extended, their smiles eager. But I didn't look at them. I looked at my sister. She looked small. The red dress, which had seemed so powerful an hour ago, now looked like a costume. She looked like a child who had been caught playing dress-up in her mother's jewelry, only to realize she had broken the clasp. Caleb looked at me. He looked ashamed. He gave a small, hesitant nod, a silent apology. I didn't smile. I didn't nod back. I just looked at him, and then I looked at Sloane, and then I looked at the room full of people who were suddenly desperate to know my name. A woman in a gold gown reached me first. "Leah! Oh my goodness! I had no idea. You are a genius. How did you manage to hide all this talent?" She laughed. A bright, fake sound, trying to rewrite her earlier dismissal of me. "You were just standing there so quietly. We thought you were, well, you know, we thought you were waiting for someone," the woman said. I looked at her. I looked at the circle of eager faces around me. "I wasn't hiding," I said. My voice was calm, steady, loud enough to be heard over the rising chatter, loud enough for Sloane to hear me one last time before the wave of adulation drowned her out. "I have always been here," I said. "You just never looked." I turned my back on them then, not to leave, but to face Dorian on the stage. I raised my glass of water to him. He raised his champagne to me. The partnership was sealed. The shift was complete. And as the band struck up a celebratory jazz number, I knew that the real work, the audit, the investigation, the dismantling of my sister's little empire, was about to begin. The adrenaline that had sustained me through the announcement began to recede, leaving behind a cold, sharp clarity. The ballroom was beginning to thin out. The serious money had already left, whisked away in black cars to discuss bond yields and tax shelters. Private, what remained were the social climbers, the drinkers, and the people who were desperately trying to figure out how the power dynamic of the city had shifted so violently in the span of 10 minutes. I was trying to make my way toward the exit, my heels aching against the marble, when I felt a hand wrap around my upper arm. It was not a gentle touch. It was a claw, manicured and desperate. "We need to talk," Sloane whispered. She didn't wait for an answer. She steered me away from the lingering crowd, pulling me into a small, velvet-draped alcove near the service corridors. It was a spot designed for servers to stack dirty plates, but tonight it served as the only place in the Waverly Grand Ballroom where Sloane Davis could drop her mask. She released my arm and spun around to face me. The stage lights were gone. Here, in the shadows, she looked older. The crimson dress that had looked so commanding under the chandeliers now seemed loud and desperate. Her eyes, usually bright with performed joy, were hard and flat. "Why didn't you tell me?" she demanded. Her voice was low, a hiss of escaping steam. "You let me stand there like an idiot. You let me introduce you as a nobody. You set me up." I looked at her, adjusting the strap of my purse. "I did not set you up, Sloane. I just stood there. You were the one doing the talking." "You knew," she snapped, her hands flying up. "You knew you were the director. You knew Dorian was going to do that. Why didn't you just say something? A text? A whisper? Hey, Sloane, maybe don't treat me like the help, because actually I run the whole damn fund. Would that have been so hard?" She was doing it again. She was rewriting history in real time to make herself the victim. In Sloane's world, her cruelty was never the problem. The problem was always that someone had allowed her to be cruel in public. "You never asked," I said. The words hung between us, simple and immovable. "I asked what you were doing," she countered, her voice pitching up into a whine. "I asked you all the time." "No," I corrected her, keeping my voice level. "You told me what I was doing. You told Caleb I was struggling. You told Mom I was depressed. You told the committee I was a data entry temp. You never once asked me a question. Sloane, you just filled in the blanks with whatever made you feel superior." She flinched. For a second, the truth actually landed. I saw the muscles in her jaw tighten as she processed the reality that her own arrogance had been the trap, but Sloane was a survivor. She shook her head, physically shaking off the guilt. "Okay, fine," she said, stepping closer, her voice shifting gears. The anger evaporated, replaced by a syrupy, conspiratorial tone. She reached out to touch my arm again, stroking the fabric of my dress. "Look, Leah, I am sorry, okay? I was just joking. You know how I am. It is just banter. I didn't mean anything by it. We are sisters. We tease." "You weren't teasing," I said, stepping back out of her reach. "You were erasing me." "Don't be dramatic," she laughed, a brittle, nervous sound. "I was just trying to help you fit in. You know you can be so awkward at these things. I was trying to lower expectations so you wouldn't feel pressured. I was protecting you." It was breathtaking. She was actually trying to sell me the idea that calling me unimportant to the entire city of Philadelphia was an act of benevolence. "I don't need your protection, Sloane," I said, "and after tonight, I don't think you are in a position to offer it." She narrowed her eyes. "Don't let this go to your head. Leah, it is just a title. Dorian is just using you for the math. You think these people actually like you? They like the money. I am the one who knows how to play the game. I am the one who got the vendors. I am the one who made this room look like a palace." "Yes," I said, my mind flashing back to the orchids. "You certainly made it look expensive." Before she could respond, a shadow fell over us. Caleb was standing at the edge of the alcove. He looked like a man who had just walked away from a car crash. His tie was loosened, and he was holding a glass of scotch that looked untouched. He looked at Sloane, then at me. "Leah," he said. His voice was heavy with embarrassment. Sloane immediately pivoted. She moved toward him, sliding her hand onto his chest. "Darling, tell her I was just being a big sister. Tell her we were just having fun." Caleb didn't look at her. He gently, but firmly, removed her hand from his chest. It was a small gesture, but it felt like a divorce decree. "I didn't know," Caleb said to me. "I honestly didn't know. If I had known who you were, if I had known what you did. That is the problem." "Caleb," I said. I didn't feel angry at him, just disappointed. He was a smart man who had allowed himself to be sedated by a pretty face and a loud voice. "You think the apology matters because you didn't know I was powerful. You think it would have been okay to laugh at me if I really was just a temp." He opened his mouth, then closed it. The flush on his cheeks deepened. "I am sorry," he said again, and this time it sounded real. "I should have asked." "Yes," I said. "You should have. Don't laugh along with the joke when you don't understand the punchline. Caleb, it makes you look cheap. I didn't wait for him to respond. I walked past them both, leaving them in the alcove, the beauty queen and her consort, standing in the dark while the lights of the party faded. I stepped out into the cool night air of the terrace. I needed a moment of silence. I needed to reset. My phone vibrated in my clutch. I pulled it out. It was a text from Dorian. My office. Tomorrow morning, 8 o'clock. We need to sign the vendor authorization forms for Phase 2 immediately. Also, I need you to confirm a payment schedule. Something looks odd in the preliminary report. I stared at the screen. Something looks odd. Dorian didn't use vague language unless he was worried. I unlocked my phone and opened my work email. I had synced the HarborLight accounts to my personal device 2 days ago, a precaution I had taken when I first suspected Sloan was playing loose with the budget. There was a new email from the internal control system. It was flagged as high priority. Subject: Payment discrepancy. Vendor ID 4402. I tapped it open. The screen was small, but the numbers were clear enough. Attention. Strategy Director. The automated audit system has flagged a recurring payment request for Signature Halo Events, LLC. The vendor has submitted 3 separate invoices for consulting and logistical support, totaling $184,000. The invoices are dated for today, but the service description is generic. Furthermore, the routing number for the vendor matches a residential branch in King of Prussia. King of Prussia. I froze. My breath caught in my throat. King of Prussia was a wealthy suburb about 30 minutes west of the city. It was also where Sloan had lived with her first husband before the divorce. It was where she still kept a P.O. box for her consulting business. I switched apps and opened the state's business registry database. It was a public record search I used all the time for vetting contractors. I typed in Signature Halo Events, LLC. The results loaded in 3 seconds. Registered agent, S. Davis. Principal address, 4200 Valley Forge Road. Unit B. King of Prussia. Unit B. I knew that address. I had sent birthday cards there. It was a mail drop service. I felt a cold sensation wash over me that had nothing to do with the night air. Sloan hadn't just hired a friend. She hadn't just picked an expensive vendor. She was the vendor. She had created a shell company, approved her own invoices, and was attempting to funnel nearly $200,000 of charity money directly into her own pocket under the guise of event production. The orchids, the LED wall, the caviar, they were all inflated costs, passed through her company so she could skim the markup. She wasn't just incompetent, she was a thief. And she was a thief who was stealing from a housing fund for the homeless. I looked back toward the ballroom doors, through the glass. I could see Sloan. She had emerged from the alcove. She wasn't crying. She wasn't hiding. She was standing with a group of board members near the bar. I watched her body language. She was leaning in, touching the arm of the chairman of the board. She was laughing. She was gesturing toward me, then waving her hand dismissively. I could almost hear what she was saying. Leah is brilliant with the spreadsheets. Absolutely. A savant. But she has 0 people skills. I am the one who keeps the relationships alive. I am the connector. She is just the calculator. She was already spinning the narrative. She was trying to position herself as the indispensable face of the operation to protect her income stream. She thought she could charm her way out of the awkwardness of the evening. She thought that if she just smiled bright enough, everyone would forget that she had tried to humiliate the boss. She didn't know I was holding the smoking gun in my hand. I looked at the phone again. I looked at the invoice number. I looked at the address. For a moment, a wave of old instinct washed over me. The instinct to protect her. The instinct to call her. Yell at her. Tell her to cancel the invoices before anyone else saw them. To fix her mess one more time so our parents wouldn't be disappointed. So the family name wouldn't be dragged through the mud. But then I remembered the way she had looked at me when she said I was not important. I remembered the way she had laughed. I remembered the way she had looked at Caleb, weaponizing his affection to hurt me. She didn't want a sister. She wanted a scapegoat. And if I covered for her now, I wouldn't just be enabling her, I would be an accomplice to fraud. I closed the email. I didn't delete it. I forwarded it. I typed in the email address for our external forensic auditor, a man named Marcus who worked for the city's oversight committee. He was a man who had no sense of humor and even less patience for social connectors. Subject: Vendor verification request. Marcus, please run a full background check on Signature Halo Events, LLC, cross-reference ownership with the current volunteer committee list. I believe we have a conflict of interest. Hold all payments. I pressed send. The little swoosh sound of the email leaving my phone felt louder than the jazz band inside. I looked back at Sloane. She was still talking, still charming, still smiling that bright, predatory smile. She had no idea that the ground beneath her feet had already dissolved. She was dancing on air, and gravity was about to collect its due. I turned and walked toward the valet stand. I didn't need to say another word to her tonight. I didn't need to argue. I didn't need to explain myself. Sloane wanted to play games with influence and perception. She wanted to play the game of who is important. Fine. I was going to play the game of paper trails. And in my game, paper always beats rock, scissors, and sisters who think the rules don't apply to them. Ms. Davis? The valet asked, holding open the door of my sensible sedan. Yes, I said, sliding into the driver's seat. That is me. I drove away from the Waverly Grand Ballroom, leaving the crystal chandeliers and the lies behind me. Tomorrow morning at 8 o'clock, the lights would be harsh, the coffee would be bitter, and the truth would be on the table. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid of what it would look like. The morning sun that hit the glass walls of the Halebridge Civic Capitol conference room was not warm. It was a cold, interrogating light that revealed every dust mote on the mahogany table and every line of exhaustion on Dorian Hale's face. The euphoria of the gala was gone. The champagne had been cleared away. All that remained was the hangover of reality. I sat at the head of the table, flanked by Dorian on my right and Elias Thorne, the fund's general counsel, on my left. Elias was a man who looked like he was born wearing a gray suit. He was currently staring at a stack of paper in front of him as if it were a bomb that had already started ticking. Tell me I am reading this wrong. Leah, Dorian said. His voice was rough, lacking the booming resonance he had used on stage the night before. He sounded like a man who had just realized the foundation of his house was made of sand. I reached out and turned the top document toward me. It was a printout of the vendor ledger for the last quarter. I didn't need to read it. I had memorized the numbers during my sleepless night before coming here. You are not reading it wrong, I said. My voice was steady, the voice of the strategist, not the sister. The line items are clear. There are 7 separate payments to a company listed as Signature Halo Events, LLC. The total amount processed in the last 90 days is $212,000. Elias Thorne tapped the paper with a manicured finger. And the service description? Generic, I replied. Logistical support, event consultation, vendor coordination fees. There is no breakdown of hours. There are no itemized receipts for goods purchased. It is just a flat fee, billed in round numbers. $212,000, Dorian repeated, rubbing his temples. Leah, that is 15% of the operating budget for the launch phase. If the City Oversight Committee sees this, they will pull our tax-exempt status before lunch. It gets worse, Elias said. He slid a second document across the table. It was a photocopy of the authorization form for the largest payment, the one for $184,000 that I had flagged the night before. At the bottom of the page, on the line reserved for the authorized officer, was a scrawl of blue ink. It was loopy, hurried, and distinctive. It was a signature I had seen on birthday cards, on permission slips when our parents were out of town, and on the backs of checks she had borrowed from me over the years. S. Davis. Who is S. Davis? Elias asked, though he clearly already suspected the answer. Because according to the corporate charter of the Harbor Light Housing Compact, only the executive director, the strategy director, or the treasurer can authorize payments over $5,000, I have checked the roster. There is no S. Davis on the board. I looked at the signature. It felt like looking at a crime scene photo where you know the victim. S. Davis is Sloane Davis, I said. My sister. She was the volunteer chair of the event committee. The silence in the room was heavy. It was the sound of a guillotine blade being hoisted up, waiting to drop. A volunteer, Elias said, his voice devoid of emotion. A volunteer authorized a 6-figure payment to a vendor. Technically, I said, forcing myself to be clinical. She didn't just authorize a payment to a vendor. She authorized a payment to herself. I opened the folder I had brought with me. Inside was the printout from the state business registry I had pulled up in my car the night before, along with a Google Maps screenshot of the address. Signature Halo Events, LLC, is registered to an address in King of Prussia, I explained, sliding the evidence toward Dorian. It is a mail drop box. The registered agent is Sloane Davis. The company was formed 4 months ago, exactly 2 weeks after she was appointed to the volunteer committee. Dorian picked up the paper. He stared at it for a long time. When he looked up, his eyes were hard. The partnership we had toasted to last night was being tested already. Leah, Dorian said, you know what this means. I do, I said. If this gets out, Dorian said, leaning forward, if the press finds out that the sister of the strategy director, the woman I just put in charge of the entire project, has been funneling charity money into a shell company. Harbor Light is dead. The city will cancel the bond match. The donors will sue for their money back. We will be buried in litigation for 10 years. Those 300 families waiting for homes will never get them. He wasn't threatening me. He was stating a fact. The project relied on trust. Sloane had just taken a sledgehammer to that trust. We have a fiduciary duty to report this, Elias said, reaching for his phone. I need to call the district attorney. No, I said. The word came out sharper than I intended. Elias stopped, his hand hovering over his phone. Dorian looked at me, his eyebrows raised. Excuse me, Elias said. If you call the district attorney today, I said, it becomes public record by this afternoon. The story will not be Charity discovers fraud. The story will be Charity run by incompetent sisters loses thousands. The scandal will kill the funding before the investigation even starts. So what are you suggesting? Dorian asked. We cover it up? You know I cannot do that. Leah, I am not asking you to cover it up, I said. I am asking you to let me finish the audit. This morning, I only have the top-level numbers. I do not know how deep it goes. I do not know if she acted alone. I do not know if she has compromised other vendor contracts. If we go to the authorities with a half-finished puzzle, they will tear the whole house down looking for the pieces. I took a breath. I had to separate the sister from the strategist. I had to kill the part of me that wanted to protect Sloane and replace it with the part of me that protected the project. Give me 2 weeks, I said. I want a full, internal forensic audit. I will freeze all outgoing payments immediately. I will review every single invoice that has touched this fund since the day Sloane walked in the door. When I hand you the file, it will be complete. It will be undeniable, and we will have a plan to recover the funds before the press gets wind of it. Dorian looked at Elias. Elias looked at the ceiling, calculating the liability. 2 weeks, Dorian said. But you cannot do this alone. It is too close to home. You need a second set of eyes. Someone who isn't named Davis. I have someone, I said. I need authorization to bring in an external consultant. His name is Kevin Chang. He was a junior analyst at North Lane Strategy Lab when I was there. He does not care about politics. He does not care about people. He cares about patterns. If there is a missing penny, Kevin will find it. Dorian nodded slowly. Fine. You have 2 weeks. But Leah? Yes? If the number goes up, Dorian said. If it is more than what we see here, you have to be prepared to cut the cord. Completely. I know, I said. 2 hours later, I was in the war room. It was a small, windowless office in the basement of the Halebridge building. Far away from the plush carpets of the executive suites, I had chosen it for the privacy. The only furniture was a long table, 3 ergonomic chairs, and a whiteboard that ran the length of the room. Kevin Chang arrived at 10 o'clock sharp. He was a young man in his late 20s, wearing a hoodie that said, "I prefer data to people," and carrying a laptop that looked like it could launch a space shuttle. He didn't ask how I was. He didn't ask about the gala. "Where is the data set?" was the first thing he said. I pointed to the secure server drive I had set up. "It is all there: vendor logs, email archives, bank transfer records, and the committee meeting minutes." Kevin sat down, cracked his knuckles, and began to type. For the next 6 hours, the only sounds in the room were the hum of the server and the rhythmic clacking of his mechanical keyboard. I sat opposite him, going through the physical copies of the contracts. Every time I turned a page, I felt a fresh wave of nausea. Here was a contract for table linens. The market rate for high-end linen rental was $12 per table. Sloan had signed a contract for $35 per table. Here was an invoice for rush printing. The date was 3 days before the event. The amount was $6,000. I checked the printer's name. It was a legitimate company. But when I looked closer at the email chain attached to the invoice, I saw a message from Sloan to the printer. "Please bill us for the rush fee, but can you add a 20% coordination surcharge? Just standard procedure." She wasn't just stealing directly. She was inflating legitimate contracts and asking for kickbacks. It was clumsy. It was greedy. And it was everywhere. "Leah," Kevin said. He didn't look up from his screen. "I found something weird in the metadata." I stood up and walked around the table to stand behind him. On his screen were 2 invoices side by side. "On the left," Kevin said, pointing, "is the invoice from Signature Halo Events dated October 12th. It is for strategic event planning. Amount, $8,000. "Okay," I said. "On the right," Kevin continued, "is the invoice from Signature Halo Events dated November 15th. It is for venue coordination. Amount, $12,000. "They look normal," I said. "Different dates, different amounts." "Look closer," Kevin said. He zoomed in on the PDF documents. "Look at the pixelation around the logo. Look at the description field." I leaned in. The description text on the first invoice read, "Services rendered for the preliminary site assessment and logistical support." The description text on the second invoice read, "Services rendered for the preliminary site assessment and logistical support." It was identical, down to the spacing. "Now look at the invoice number," Kevin said. The October invoice was number 001. The November invoice was number 001. "She didn't even change the invoice number?" I asked, stunned. "It gets better," Kevin said. He pulled up a third document. This one was dated December. Invoice number 001. Description: Services rendered for the preliminary site assessment and logistical support. Amount, $24,000. "She is copy-pasting the same file," I whispered. "She is just changing the date and the dollar amount. She is not even generating new records." "It is lazy," Kevin said, shaking his head with the disdain of a professional auditor. "It implies she didn't think anyone would ever look. She thought the system was automated and that no human eyes would ever verify the sequence." I stared at the screen. The arrogance of it was staggering. Sloan hadn't just stolen money. She had insulted the intelligence of everyone involved. She assumed that because she was Sloan Davis. The rules of accounting simply did not apply to her. She assumed that her charm was a valid form of currency that superseded math. "Can you trace where the money went after it hit the Signature Halo account?" I asked. "I am piercing the veil now," Kevin said, his fingers flying. "Since she used a mail drop, I can cross-reference the routing number with the payroll deposits. Wait, here it is." He brought up a bank transfer log. "Signature Halo Events, LLC, received the funds," Kevin narrated. "Within 24 hours of each deposit, 80% of the funds were transferred out." "To where?" I asked. "To a personal checking account," Kevin said. "Account holder, Sloane Davis, and wait, there is a secondary transfer. Secondary? Yeah. About 10% of each payment is being wired to a different account. It is a joint account. The names on the account are Sloane Davis and Caleb Vaughn. The room seemed to tilt. Caleb. I grabbed the edge of the table. Caleb is receiving a cut? It looks like it, Kevin said. Or at least, money is flowing into an account that bears his name. Whether he knows about it or not is a different question. But on paper, he is a beneficiary of the fraud. I closed my eyes. The image of Caleb's face from last night flashed in my mind. He had looked so sincere when he apologized. He had looked so shocked. I didn't know. He had said, I honestly didn't know. Was he an actor too? Was the entire relationship a long con? Or was Sloane just using their joint account to hide money without telling him, implicating him in a felony he didn't even know he was committing? Print it, I said. My voice was cold steel. Print everything. Kevin, every duplicate invoice, every transfer log, every pixelated logo. What are you going to do? Kevin asked, the printer whirring to life behind us. I looked at the growing stack of evidence. It wasn't just a file anymore. It was a weapon. It was a weapon that would destroy my sister's reputation, likely send her to prison, and potentially ruin the man she was going to marry. But then I thought about the families. I thought about the single mothers who were waiting for the Harbor Light apartments. I thought about the elderly veterans who needed the subsidized rent. Every dollar Sloane had stolen was a dollar taken from their heating bill. Their roof, their safety. Sloane had made her choice. She had chosen to value her lifestyle over their lives. I am going to finish the audit, I said. And then I am going to ask my sister one question. But this time, I won't be asking for an apology. I will be asking for a confession. I picked up the first of the duplicate invoices. The 001 stared back at me. It was the mark of someone who thought she was untouchable. She said I wasn't important, I murmured to the empty room. But she is about to find out that the person who checks the math is the most important person in the world. The silence I had hoped for after the audit began did not last. It was shattered not by a scream, but by a notification chime, then another, then a deluge. By noon on Tuesday, my phone was vibrating across my desk like a trapped insect. Sloane had gone to ground, but she had not gone quiet. She had gone digital. I picked up my phone and opened Instagram. Sloane's profile, usually a curated gallery of charity luncheons and perfectly lit couples photos, had shifted tone. She had posted a story, a black screen with white. Serif text. It was elegant, understated, and designed to inflict maximum damage. It is heartbreaking when family lets jealousy dictate professional narratives. The text read, True leadership is about lifting others up, not inventing scandals to secure your own position, staying strong for the truth. She didn't name me. She didn't have to. The Whisper Network of Philadelphia did the rest. Within hours, the narrative was taking shape in the comments and in the group chats of the city's elite. The story was no longer about a financial discrepancy. It was about a bitter, socially awkward younger sister who had finally found a way to tear down her popular, successful sibling. She is good, Kevin said from across the war room table, reading the same post on his tablet. I mean, objectively, she has managed to frame a forensic audit as a personal vendetta without citing a single fact. She fights with feelings, I said, putting the phone down face down. I fight with ledgers. Feelings travel faster. The vibrations started again. This time, it wasn't a notification. It was a call. The caller ID read Mom. I stared at the screen. My mother had not called me in 3 weeks. She usually communicated through Sloane, treating my sister as the family press secretary. I considered letting it go to voicemail, but I knew that would only give them more ammunition. She won't even talk to her own mother. They would say, I answered, Hello, Mom. Leah. My mother's voice was tight, the sonic equivalent of a pursed lip. I just got off the phone with your sister. She is hysterical. She can barely breathe. She should probably save her breath, I said, my voice flat. She is going to need it to explain the bank transfers. Stop it, my mother snapped. Just stop it. I do not know what kind of power trip you are on. Leah, but it ends now. You are humiliating us. Do you have any idea what people are saying? Mrs. Gableway called me to ask if the wedding is still on because of your little investigation. It is not my investigation. Mom, it is a state compliance requirement. There is money missing. There is always money missing in these big things, she cried, dismissing grand larceny as if it were a lost sock in the dryer. Sloane worked her fingers to the bone for that party. She made you look good. She introduced you to everyone. And this is how you thank her? By accusing her of what? Being disorganized? By accusing her of theft, I said. $184,000, Mom. That is not disorganization. That is a house. That is a home for a family of 4 that we cannot build because Sloane needed to funnel cash into a shell company. You are jealous. My mother spat the word out. You have always been jealous of her shine. You finally get a little bit of power, and the first thing you do is try to destroy the only person who actually loves you. Call Dorian Hale. Tell him it was a clerical error. Fix this, Leah, or do not bother coming to Christmas. The line went dead. I sat there, listening to the silence of the disconnected line. It was a familiar ache, an old wound that had been reopened so many times it had formed a callus. My mother didn't care about the truth. She cared about the picture, and I had just cracked the frame. I didn't have time to mourn the relationship. My email pinged with a calendar invite. Subject: Emergency Oversight Meeting. Host: Councilman Miller. Location: Boardroom. Time: now. Here we go, I muttered. I grabbed my laptop and headed upstairs. Councilman Miller was a close friend of the family. He was also one of the board members Sloane had spent the most time charming at the gala. When I walked into Boardroom B, the atmosphere was frigid. Miller sat at the head of the table, flanked by 2 other board members who looked uncomfortable. Dorian was there, too, standing by the window, looking out at the city skyline. He looked grim. Ms. Davis, Miller said, not offering me a seat. We are hearing some disturbing rumors. We hear that you have frozen all vendor payments. Construction on Phase 2 was supposed to start on Monday. The contractors are threatening to walk if they don't get their mobilization checks. I froze the payments to ensure the liquidity was actually there, I said, standing my ground, and to verify that the vendors are legitimate. We vouch for these vendors, Miller said, slamming his hand on the table. This project runs on trust. Ms. Davis, your witch hunt is paralyzing us. Sloane Davis has been a pillar of this community. Dragging her name through the mud based on a few clerical anomalies is reckless. I am proposing a motion to remove you from the executive oversight position immediately, pending an external— It is not a clerical anomaly, I interrupted. I didn't raise my voice, but I projected it, filling the room. And if you fire me right now, Councilman, you will be explaining to the federal investigators why you terminated the whistleblower in the middle of an active fraud audit. Miller's face turned a shade of purple that clashed with his tie. Are you threatening this board? I am protecting this board, I said. Because if you sign those checks to Sloane's shell company, you aren't just trusting her, you are becoming accessories. Dorian turned from the window. Let her work. Miller, if she is wrong, I will fire her myself, but if she is right, she is the only thing standing between us and prison. Miller glared at me, his jaw working. He waved his hand dismissively. You have 24 hours. Davis, if construction doesn't start by Friday, you are done. I walked out of the room with my head high, but my hands were shaking. They were closing ranks. Sloane had mobilized her allies. She was turning the institution against me. I needed to get back to the war room. I needed the smoking gun. When I swiped my badge to enter the basement office, Kevin was standing up, pacing. That was bad. Kevin never stood up unless the server was on fire. We have a problem, Kevin said. What now? The logs, Kevin said, pointing at the main monitor. I went back to cross-reference the approval timestamps for the signature Halo invoices. They are gone. I rushed to the screen. The fields where Sloane's digital approval trail had been were blank. Not just empty, wiped. The data had been scrubbed. Someone accessed the admin panel, Kevin said, his voice rising in panic. About 10 minutes ago, while you were in the meeting, they used a root-level override to delete the transaction history. It looks like a system glitch. If an external auditor looked at this now, they wouldn't see fraud. They would just see a missing file. I stared at the screen. My heart hammered against my ribs. Sloane didn't know how to do a root-level override. Sloane thought the cloud was a literal atmospheric condition. She couldn't have done this. We have a mole, I whispered. Someone inside the IT department. Or someone with executive admin privileges. Without those logs, Kevin said, it is your word against hers. She can claim she never signed anything. She can claim identity theft. She can claim you forged the screenshots we took earlier. I took backups, I said calmly. Kevin looked at me. You did? I mirrored the entire drive to a secure offline server the night of the gala, I said. Before I even spoke to Dorian, I knew they would try to scrub it. The evidence is safe. Kevin, they just don't know that. I sat down, a cold smile touching my lips. This was the mistake I had been waiting for. By trying to delete the evidence, they had just proven intent. This wasn't just embezzlement anymore. It was conspiracy. But we need to know who helped her, I said. Sloane is dangerous, but she is incompetent. Whoever scrubbed these logs knows the system. If we don't catch them, they will find a way to discredit the backups. How do we catch a ghost? Kevin asked. They used a spoofer. The IP address leads to a coffee shop in Jersey. I looked at the blank screen. I thought about Sloane's desperation. I thought about Caleb, caught in the middle. We don't catch a ghost, I said. We catch the person who is haunting the ghost. Sloane is panicked. She thinks she erased the tracks, but she needs to be sure. She needs to know that the money is still coming. I opened my laptop. I am going to send out a trap. A trap? A compliance addendum, I said, typing furiously. I am going to draft a very boring, very urgent email to all vendors on the waitlist status. I will say that due to the system glitch, the very glitch they just caused, all pending vendors must re-verify their tax ID and banking details within 2 hours to prevent their contracts from being voided. She will bite, Kevin said, catching on. She needs that money. If she thinks her contract is about to be voided, she will sign anything. Exactly, I said. But this isn't just a PDF. I am embedding a pixel tracker in the signature field, and I am adding a unique watermark to the document sent to signature Halo events. It is invisible to the eye, but it contains a unique hash code. And, I finished, hitting save on the document. I am going to send it to the email address registered to signature Halo, but I am also going to CC the internal project manager alias, the one that only the executive team and the admin assistants have access to. You think the mole is watching that inbox? I know they are. They have to be. They are monitoring everything. I took a deep breath. Send it. Kevin hit the enter key. We waited. The minutes dragged like hours. I watched the second hand on the wall clock tick. 1 minute, 5 minutes, 10 minutes. My phone buzzed. It was a text from Caleb. Leah, please. Sloane is falling apart. She says you are framing her. I don't know what to believe. I found a transfer in our account that I didn't authorize. I am scared. I didn't reply. I couldn't save him yet. Not until I cut the head off the snake. Movement, Kevin shouted. I spun around. The document was opened, Kevin said, his eyes glued to the data stream. It was opened via the link sent to signature Halo. Location? King of Prussia, Kevin said. Mobile device. That is Sloane. Wait for the signature, I commanded. She is reading it. Scrolling. Okay. She is signing. She is verifying the bank details. She is confirming the account number. Got her. She just confirmed the fraudulent account again. That is good, I said. But who else opened it? Kevin watched the screen. Wait, the CC'd email. The internal copy. It was just opened. Where? Here, Kevin whispered. In the building. Which floor? Tracing. It is on the secure Wi-Fi. 4th floor. Executive wing. The 4th floor. That was where the board offices were. That was where the IT director sat. That was where the councilman had his temporary office. The document is being modified, Kevin said. Someone is trying to strip the watermark before forwarding it. They are trying to clean it for her. They are editing the file? Yes, they are. Wait, they just hit approve on the vendor portal. They are trying to force the payment through manually, using the re-verification as a pretext. Who is it, Kevin? Kevin's fingers flew across the keys, bypassing the spoofer now that the user was active on the internal network. Device ID matches. Kevin stopped. He turned to me, his face pale. It is not the IT director. Who is it? It is the device registered to the vice president of the board, Kevin said. Councilman Miller? I leaned back in my chair. Of course, Miller wasn't just defending Sloan because she was charming. He was defending her because he was in on it. The consulting fees likely didn't stop with Sloan. She was the front, but Miller was the political cover. He was the one who ensured the city contracts kept flowing, and Sloan was the funnel that moved the money back to him. He just signed it, Kevin said. He digitally signed the approval for signature Halo events, overriding your freeze. I looked at the screen. The watermark I had embedded, a tiny, invisible string of code, was now permanently stamped with Councilman Miller's digital fingerprint. He had just signed his own arrest warrant. We have them, I said. We have Sloan confirming the fraud from her phone, and we have Miller using his executive access to facilitate it. I stood up. I picked up the hard drive containing the backups. Print the logs. Kevin, print the tracker report. Print Miller's device ID history. Where are you going? Kevin asked. I am going to the one person who can fire a councilman. I said. I am going to see Dorian, and then I am going to see my sister. I walked to the door, the weight of the hard drive heavy in my hand. Sloan had tried to use the family name to bury me. She had tried to use social media to shame me. She had tried to use our mother to break me, but she had forgotten the one rule I had lived by for 30 years while she was busy being the star. You can fake a smile. You can fake a reputation, but you cannot fake the math. Game over. Sloan, I said into the empty hallway. I walked out of the Halebridge building with the digital evidence against Councilman Miller burning a hole in my bag. But my phone was still vibrating. It was not Sloan this time. It was Caleb. Meet me at the Rittenhouse coffee shop, the one on 18th. 10 minutes. I have something you need to see. I hesitated. My instinct was to cut him off. According to Kevin's audit, money from the fraudulent Signature Halo account was flowing into a joint account with Caleb's name on it. He was technically a beneficiary of the theft. But something about the tone of his voice at the gala, the genuine confusion, the way he had pulled his hand away from Sloan, made me pause. I texted back, "You have 5 minutes." I walked the 3 blocks to the coffee shop. It was a sterile, overpriced place with exposed brick and baristas who looked like they were judging your caffeine tolerance. Caleb was sitting at a corner table, far away from the window. He was not wearing a suit today. He was wearing a gray sweater, and he looked like he hadn't slept in 48 hours. He didn't stand up when I approached. He just pushed a cup of black coffee toward the empty chair opposite him. "I didn't order that," I said, sitting down but not touching the cup. "I know," Caleb said. His voice was rough. "But you look like you are running on adrenaline and spite. So I figured you needed the caffeine." I looked at him. "I found the transfers. Caleb, 10% of every invoice Sloan stole went into a joint account with your name on it. Did you think I wouldn't check?" Caleb didn't flinch. He didn't look surprised. He reached into his leather satchel and pulled out a thick manila envelope. He slid it across the table. "I closed that account this morning," he said. "The bank is currently holding the funds in escrow pending an investigation that I initiated. I didn't know the money was there until yesterday when I got a notification about a deposit limit being reached. I thought it was for the wedding registry." "You are a risk management officer," I said, my voice cold. "And you didn't notice 5-figure deposits hitting your account for 3 months?" "It was a savings account we opened for the house down payment," Caleb said, rubbing his face. "Sloan had the login. She told me her consulting business was booming. She said she wanted to contribute more to the mortgage. I trusted her. Leah, that was my mistake." "But I am not a thief." "Then why are we here?" I asked. "If you want to plead your innocence, tell it to the forensic auditor." "I am not here to plead innocence," Caleb said. He leaned forward, his eyes locking onto mine. "I am here to tell you that I didn't ask that question at the gala by accident." I paused. If she isn't important, why did the room stop breathing? "I thought you were defending me," I said. "I wasn't defending you," Caleb said, and the admission was sharp, stripping away the romance of the moment. "I was stress testing her." He opened a folder on his iPad and turned it toward me. It was a PDF of a document titled Vendor Service Verification, Phase 1. "2 weeks ago," Caleb said, pointing at the screen. "Sloan brought this to me at breakfast. She was laughing, acting casual. She said she needed a signature for a vendor because the board treasurer was on vacation and they needed a second officer to sign off. She put a pen in my hand. She kissed my neck. I looked at the document. It was a fabrication. It was a form authorizing payment for signature Halo events, but it listed Caleb Vaughn as an independent reviewer. "She tried to get you to co-sign the fraud," I whispered. "She tried to make me an accomplice," Caleb corrected. "I read the document. I told her I couldn't sign it because I had no official capacity with the fund. She got angry, not just annoyed, scared. She accused me of not supporting her career. She threw a coffee mug. That was the first crack." He took a sip of his own coffee, his hand shaking slightly. "I work in risk, Leah. When I see numbers that are too round, too perfect, I get suspicious. Sloan was talking about this gala like she was organizing the Met Gala. But she wouldn't let me see the guest list. She kept talking about overhead and logistics fees. So I started digging. I didn't have access to the accounts like you do, but I had access to her behavior. So at the party, Caleb continued, when she started insulting you, calling you a nobody, calling you a tag-along, it felt rehearsed. It felt like she was trying too hard to push you out of the frame. In my line of work, when someone tries desperately to hide an asset, it is usually because that asset proves they are lying." He looked at me with a newfound respect. "I asked that question because I wanted to see if she would panic," Caleb said. "And she did. But then you answered, and when Mr. Abernathy stood up, I knew right then that I was engaged to a con artist." "You knew who I was," I said, realizing it. "You didn't look surprised when Dorian introduced me." "I saw the Davis memo 3 months ago," Caleb admitted. My eyes widened. The Davis memo was an internal white paper I had written for the city council regarding bond yield structures. It was dense, technical, and widely circulated among financial wonks in Philadelphia. It was signed L. Davis, North Lane Strategy Lab. "I read it for work," Caleb said. "It was brilliant. I assumed L. Davis was some 60-year-old professor from Wharton. When Sloan introduced you as Leah, I didn't make the connection because she painted you as such a failure. But when Dorian said strategy director, the pieces clicked. You are the L. Davis who wrote the bond structure." "Yes," I said. "Sloan told me you were a temp," Caleb said, shaking his head in disbelief. "She told me you entered data. She has been lying to me about who you are for 2 years. Leah, and I realized something last night. She didn't humiliate you because she was mean. She humiliated you because you were the only threat to her operation." I sat back in my chair. The noise of the espresso machine faded into the background. It made perfect sense. Sloane's cruelty wasn't just sibling rivalry. It was a containment strategy. As long as everyone thought I was unimportant, no one would think to ask me about the budget. As long as I was the shy sister, she could keep me away from the donors. She had built a cage of insults around me, not to keep me down, but to keep me silent. She needed me to be invisible, I said softly. Because if people looked at me, they might look at the ledger. Exactly, Caleb said. She bragged about it. He swiped to the next image on his iPad. It was a screenshot of a text message conversation. The contact name was Councilman M. She left her phone unlocked on the counter while she was in the shower this morning, Caleb said. I took a picture. I leaned in to read the text. Sloan. Don't worry about Leah. I have handled it. I have convinced everyone she is socially incompetent. As long as we keep her out of the spotlight, we control the board. She is just a calculator. She doesn't have the guts to speak up. Councilman M. Make sure she stays in the back room tonight. If she talks to Abernathy, we are exposed. Sloan. She won't. I will make her feel so small she will want to leave early. I felt a cold rage settle in my chest. It was different from the anger I had felt before. This was cleaner. It was the anger of seeing the blueprint of your own oppression. Sloan hadn't just been mean. She had weaponized my own introversion against me to facilitate a felony. Thank you for this, I said, looking up at Caleb. I am done. Leah, Caleb said. I packed a bag this morning. I am staying at a hotel. I cannot marry her, not because of the money, but because she looked me in the eye and lied about her own sister to cover a crime. That is a level of pathology I cannot live with. Does she know you know? No, Caleb said. She thinks I am just taking space to process the embarrassment of the gala. She thinks she can still win me back. Good, I said. Standing up, let her think that. I need her to feel safe for one more day. I left Caleb at the coffee shop and took a cab back to the war room. Kevin was waiting for me. He looked excited. We have the pattern, Kevin said as I walked in. The audit is definitive. He pointed to the wall, where he had taped up a series of printouts. Signature Halo Events isn't just double billing, Kevin explained. They are running a systematic withdrawal scheme, every Friday at 3 o'clock, like clockwork. They submit an invoice for exactly $9,500. It is just under the $10,000 threshold that triggers an automatic secondary review. Structuring, I said. It is illegal. It is amateur hour, Kevin scoffed. And I found something else. The vendor list for Phase 2? Sloan added 3 new companies yesterday morning. Let me guess, I said. Registered agents we don't know? Registered agents that don't exist, Kevin said. Ghost companies. If we hadn't caught this now, she was planning to siphon off nearly $500,000 during the construction kickoff. I looked at the wall of evidence, the duplicate invoices, the fake companies, the text messages Caleb had provided, the digital logs of Councilman Miller trying to scrub the system. We had everything. We had enough to send them both to prison for 10 years. But prison was a legal consequence. I wanted something else first. I wanted the truth to be as public as the lie had been. Sloan had used a ballroom to tell the world I was nothing. I was going to use a ballroom to show the world exactly what she was. My phone rang. It was Dorian. Leah, Dorian said. I just got off the phone with the mayor. He wants to know why construction hasn't started. He wants a press conference tomorrow to announce Phase 2. He wants a feel-good moment to distract from the rumors. Give it to him, I said. What? Dorian sounded surprised. Leah, we can't. We are in the middle of a fraud investigation. No, I said. We are finishing a fraud investigation. Dorian, schedule the press conference. Invite the press. Invite the donors. And invite Sloan. Sloan? Tell her we want to give her a Community Impact Award for her work on the gala, I said. Tell her that despite the misunderstandings, the board wants to honor her contribution. Tell her it will be televised. You want to ambush her, Dorian said. He paused, and I could hear him thinking. It is risky, Leah. If she senses a trap, she will run. She won't run, I said, looking at the text message on Caleb's screenshot. I will make her feel so small. She is too arrogant to run. She thinks she has charmed Councilman Miller into protecting her. She thinks Caleb is just sulking. If you offer her a shiny plaque and a microphone, she will walk right into the fire. And Miller? Invite him too, I said. Tell him he needs to be there to present the award. He won't miss a chance to be on camera. Leah, Dorian said, his voice lowering. If we do this, it has to be clean. One shot, no screaming match, just facts. I don't scream. Dorian, I said. I am a strategist. I don't need to raise my voice to be heard. I just need to ask the right question. Okay, Dorian said. I will set it up. Tomorrow morning, 10 o'clock, the Grand Hall. I hung up the phone. I turned to the whiteboard. I picked up a red marker. In the center of the board, I wrote a single sentence. It wasn't a formula. It wasn't a dollar amount. It was the question. Who authorized the payment? I stared at it. It was simple. It was boring. But in less than 24 hours, that question was going to tear the roof off the Halebridge Civic Capitol building. I looked at Kevin. Pack up the files. We are done here. Go home and sleep. Kevin, tomorrow. We are not auditors. What are we tomorrow? Kevin asked, capping his pen. Tomorrow, I said. We are the executioners. The night before the press conference, the air in my apartment felt heavy, charged with the static of an approaching storm. I was sitting at my kitchen island, a cup of tea cooling untouched beside a single, thin file folder. When the buzzer rang, I checked the camera feed. It was Sloane. She did not look like the confident socialite who had commanded the ballroom 48 hours ago. She was wearing a trench coat over sweatpants. Her hair pulled back in a messy bun, and her face was scrubbed clean of makeup. It was a calculated look. It was the vulnerable younger sister costume, pulled from the back of her closet to elicit sympathy. I buzzed her in. I did not do it because I wanted to see her. I did it because I needed to see if she would break. When I opened the door, she didn't say hello. She walked straight past me, dropped her bag on my sofa, and turned around with tears already streaming down her face. It was an impressive performance. The tears tracked perfectly down her cheeks, not ruining her complexion, just enhancing the tragic aesthetic. Leah, she choked out, her voice trembling. I am so scared. I leaned against the doorframe, crossing my arms. Hello, Sloane. You have to stop this, she said, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. Caleb is sleeping at a hotel. Councilman Miller isn't answering my texts. Everyone is acting like I have the plague. You have to tell them to stop. I cannot tell the forensic auditors to stop. Sloane, I said calmly. They follow the math, and the math leads to your bank account. Sloane let out a sob, sinking onto the edge of my sofa. It wasn't stealing. Leah, you are making it sound so ugly. It was a bridge loan. That is all. I had some cash flow issues with the business. I was going to pay it back as soon as the consulting fees from the spring gala came in. I swear. A bridge loan, I repeated. You took $184,000 from a housing fund for homeless families to pay off your credit cards, and you call it a bridge loan? I was going to put it back, she cried, looking up at me with wide, pleading eyes. We are family, Leah. Doesn't that mean anything to you? I am your big sister. I changed your diapers. I walked you to school. Are you really going to send me to jail over a bookkeeping error? It is not a bookkeeping error when you forge a signature, I said, and it is not family when you try to frame me for incompetence to cover your tracks. Sloane stood up then, the tears vanishing as if she had turned a faucet. She moved toward me, her hands clasped. The bargaining phase had begun. Look, she said, her voice dropping to a whisper. I can fix this. I have friends. I can raise the money. I can write a check to the fund tomorrow morning for the full amount. No one has to know. We can just say it was a misallocated deposit. You are the strategy director. You can bury it in the variances. You can make it disappear. I looked at her. She was offering to pay the money back. Not because she was sorry she took it, but because she had been caught. She thought integrity was something you could buy back if you just wrote a big enough check. It is too late for that, I said. The audit is already logged on the state server. If I bury it now, I go to jail with you. So you are going to ruin me? She hissed, the vulnerability mask slipping completely. You are going to stand there and watch them put handcuffs on me? Think about Mom. Leah, think about Dad's legacy, as if on cue. My phone rang on the counter. It was my mother. Sloane looked at the phone, then at me. A small, triumphant smile touched her lips. She had prepped the battlefield. I picked up the phone and put it on speaker. Leah! My mother's voice filled the kitchen, shrill and panicked. Sloane says you are trying to get her arrested. She says you have gone crazy with power. What is wrong with you? Mom, I said, looking directly at Sloane. Sloane stole nearly $200,000. She committed fraud. She made a mistake, my mother shouted. She is creative. Leah, she is not good with numbers like you. She got confused. Why do you have to be so cruel? Why do you have to make everything a federal case? You are just jealous because she is getting an award tomorrow and you are not? She is not getting an award tomorrow. Mom, I said. She is walking into a trap. Don't you dare, my mother threatened. If you ruin your sister's future, if you embarrass this family in front of the whole city, I will never forgive you. Do you hear me? You fix this, Leah. You fix it right now. I looked at the phone. For 30 years, I had been fixing it. I had fixed Sloane's grades. I had fixed her budget. I had fixed her lies. I had been the glue that held the Davis family portrait together while Sloane took a hammer to the frame. No, I said. The word hung in the air, heavy and absolute. What did you say? My mother asked, her voice dropping. I said no, I repeated. I cannot ruin Sloane's future. Mom, I do not have that power. She ruined it herself when she signed those checks. I am done fixing her messes. I hung up the phone. Sloane stared at me. Her face had gone pale. She realized, perhaps for the first time, that the old levers didn't work anymore. The guilt trip had run out of gas. You are a monster, she whispered. No, I said, walking to the door and opening it. I am just the auditor. Get out of my apartment. Sloane, she grabbed her bag. She didn't look at me as she passed. You will regret this, she said. Tomorrow, when I go up on that stage, I am going to shine so bright no one will believe a word you say. She slammed the door behind her. 2 hours later, I was in a conference room with Elias Thorne and Dorian. The mood was somber. We were not planning a celebration. We were planning a controlled demolition. We have to be careful with the optics, Elias said, pacing the room. If we arrest her on stage, it looks like a stunt. It looks vindictive. The press will turn on us for staging a spectacle. We are not arresting her on stage, I said. We are letting her accept the award. We are letting her take the microphone. We are letting her thank the board, the donors, and the city. And then? Dorian asked. And then, I said. We open the floor for questions. The press will ask about the timeline for Phase 2, Dorian said. They will ask about the bond match. I will take the first question, I said. I will be in the front row. I will raise my hand, and I will ask one question that requires a specific, factual answer. What is the question? Elias asked. I looked down at my notepad. I had written it out 3 times. It had to be precise. It couldn't be emotional. It couldn't be an accusation. It had to be a query that, in answering, would force her to either confess or lie so blatantly that the evidence in my hand would destroy her instantly. I will ask about the vendor selection process, I said. Specifically, about the payment authorization for signature Halo events. Dorian nodded slowly. If she lies and says she doesn't know the vendor, we show the registration documents. If she admits she knows them, we ask why she signed the checks. Exactly, I said. It is a logic trap. There is no exit. And the money? Elias asked. What about the recovery? We have already filed the civil asset forfeiture requests, I said. As soon as the press conference ends, the accounts will be frozen, including the joint account she shares with Caleb. At the mention of Caleb, Dorian looked at me. How is he handling this? He is doing what he has to do, I said. At that exact moment, 5 miles away in a hotel room, Caleb Vaughn was sitting on the edge of a bed, staring at a velvet box in his hand. Inside was the engagement ring he had given Sloane 6 months ago. It was a vintage cut, elegant and expensive. He had loved her. He knew that. He had loved the version of her she presented to the world, the bright, charismatic force of nature. But he realized now that he had been in love with a reflection. His phone buzzed. It was Sloane. Baby, please come home. I need you for tomorrow. I'm getting the Community Impact Award. It is going to be huge. We can put all this ugliness behind us. Just stand by me, please. Caleb looked at the text. He didn't reply. He stood up, put the ring box in his suit pocket, and walked to the window. He wasn't going to go home. He wasn't going to stand by her side and smile for the cameras, but he would be there. He had to be. He needed to see it end. He needed to see the moment the mask finally fell off, so he could be sure he wasn't crazy for leaving. The morning of the press conference dawned cold and bright. The grand hall of the Halebridge building had been transformed. Rows of chairs were set up for the press and the VIP donors. A podium stood on a raised stage, flanked by the flags of the city and the state. I arrived early. I went straight to the sound booth to check the microphone levels. I wasn't leaving anything to chance. By 9:30, the room was filling up. The energy was different from the gala. It was sharper, more professional. Cameras were being set up on tripods in the back. Reporters were checking their recording devices. At 9:45, Sloane arrived. She made an entrance. She was wearing a white suit, a deliberate choice to suggest purity and innocence. Her hair was blown out to perfection. She was smiling, waving to people, stopping to shake hands. She looked radiant. If you didn't know she was a criminal, you would think she was the mayor. Councilman Miller was with her, hovering like a nervous bodyguard. He looked less confident. He was sweating, constantly checking his phone. He knew something was wrong, but he was too deep in the lie to pull out now. Sloane scanned the room. Her eyes landed on me in the front row. I was wearing a dark gray suit, sitting with my hands folded in my lap. On the seat next to me was the thin file folder. She held my gaze for a second. Her smile faltered. Just a fraction. Before she dialed it back up to 100%. She whispered something to Miller, and they moved toward the stage. Dorian walked out to the podium at 10 o'clock sharp. The room went quiet. "Welcome," Dorian said. "Thank you for coming. Today marks a significant milestone for the Harbor Light Housing Compact. We are ready to launch Phase 2. He went through the standard talking points. He thanked the city. He thanked the bond issuers. He spoke about the families we were going to help. Then, he turned to the side of the stage. "But before we get to the technical details," Dorian said, his voice neutral, "we want to acknowledge the effort that went into our fundraising gala. The event raised record-breaking numbers, and the chair of that committee is here with us today." He gestured to Sloane. "Please welcome Sloane Davis." The applause was polite. Sloane walked onto the stage, beaming. She took the microphone from Dorian as if it were a scepter. "Thank you, Dorian," she said, her voice warm and engaging. "It is such an honor. You know, when we started this journey, people said we couldn't bring the community together, but I have always believed that if you lead with your heart, the resources will follow." She looked out at the audience, making eye contact with the donors. "This isn't about numbers," she said. "It is about people. It is about trust. And I am so proud to have played a small part in building that trust." I sat there, listening to her talk about trust while knowing she had embezzled nearly $200,000. It was surreal. It was the ultimate gaslight. "And now," Sloane said, "I would love to invite Councilman Miller up to say a few words before we take questions." Miller walked up. He looked like he was walking to the gallows. He mumbled a few words about partnership and community. eager to get off the stage. "Thank you, Councilman," Sloane said. She turned back to the crowd. "We have time for a few questions." Hands went up from the press corps. A reporter from the Inquirer asked about the timeline. A blogger asked about the architectural design. Sloane handled them with ease. She was in her element. She was winning. Then, she made a mistake. She looked at me. "Are there any other questions?" she asked. Her eyes challenging me. She thought I wouldn't do it. She thought I was too weak, too afraid of our mother, too afraid of the scene. I stood up. The movement drew the room's attention. The cameras turned. The microphones swiveled. I didn't need a microphone. I projected my voice clearly, the way I had learned to do in boardrooms full of hostile men. "I have a question," I said. Sloane's smile tightened. "Go ahead, Leah. Although we are really focused on the press today." "This is for the record," I said. I picked up the file folder. I didn't open it. I just held it. "Ms. Davis," I said, using her formal name, "you mentioned that this project is built on trust. Can you explain to the donors in this room why the vendor Signature Halo Events received $184,000 in expedited payments over the last 3 months?" The room went silent. It was the same silence as the gala, but heavier. Sloane laughed nervously. "Leah, I don't think this is the time for granular accounting questions. We can discuss vendors in the committee meeting. I think this is exactly the time," I said, taking a step forward. "Because according to the state registry, Signature Halo Events is owned by you, and according to the payment logs, the person who authorized those checks was also you." A gasp rippled through the room. A camera flash went off, blindingly bright. Sloane gripped the podium. That is ridiculous. I don't know what you're talking about." "I have the bank transfer records here," I said, lifting the file. "I have the duplicate invoices, and I have the digital log of Councilman Miller trying to delete the approval history from the server yesterday afternoon." I looked at Miller. He had turned the color of ash. He took a step back, away from Sloane, physically distancing himself from the blast radius. "So my question is simple," I said, looking Sloane dead in the eye. "Did you authorize the transfer of $184,000 to your own personal account? Yes or no?" Sloane opened her mouth, but no sound came out. She looked at the cameras. She looked at Miller, who was staring at his shoes. She looked at Caleb, who was standing in the back of the room, his arms crossed, watching her with a look of absolute finality. The silence stretched. It was agonizing. It was the sound of a carefully constructed life collapsing under the weight of a single truth. And for the first time in her life, my sister had nothing to say. The silence that filled the grand hall was not empty. It was heavy, suffocating, and absolute. It was the kind of silence that usually follows a gunshot or a natural disaster. 400 people, reporters, donors, city officials, and board members, were holding their breath in unison. The only sound was the high-pitched whine of a camera flash recharging in the back of the room. I stood in the front row, holding the file folder like a shield. On stage, Sloane looked like a statue made of ice that was beginning to crack under the studio lights. Her hand was gripping the podium so hard that her knuckles were white. Beside her, Councilman Miller was staring at a spot on the floor, likely wishing he could dissolve into the carpet. Sloane tried to laugh. It was a terrible sound, brittle and sharp. "Leah," she said, her voice shaking despite her best efforts to keep it smooth. "You are being incredibly dramatic. I think the stress of the project has gotten to you. We can sit down and go over the boring details later. Right now, we are here to celebrate." She turned to Dorian, her eyes pleading for him to intervene, to take the microphone back, to save her. "Dorian," she said, forcing a smile, "maybe we should move on to the award presentation. The press is waiting." Dorian Hale did not move to save her. He stepped forward, but not to the podium. He stepped to the edge of the stage, looking down at me. "We are not moving on," Dorian said. His voice was not amplified by the microphone. but it carried clearly in the dead quiet of the room. Leah asked a question, and before I hand over a plaque that stands for integrity, I need to know the answer. He looked at the file in my hand. Open it. I nodded. I walked up the 3 steps to the stage. I didn't rush. I moved with the methodical pace of someone who has checked the math 3 times. I walked past Councilman Miller, who flinched as if I were going to strike him. I walked past Sloane, who smelled of expensive perfume and fear. I placed the folder on the podium, directly over her prepared speech. "You said I was dramatic," I said, speaking into the microphone. My voice did not shake. "So let's look at the data. Data is not dramatic. Data is just the truth." I opened the folder. The first page was the registration document I had pulled from the state database. "This," I said, holding it up for the cameras, "is the incorporation paper for Signature Halo Events, LLC. It lists the registered agent as Sloane Davis. It lists the address as a mail drop in King of Prussia." I flipped the page. "And this," I continued, "is the payment log from the Harbor Light internal server. It shows a transfer of $184,000 initiated last Tuesday. It shows the approving officer's digital signature." I turned to the screen behind the stage, the massive LED wall that Sloane had spent so much money renting. I nodded to the technician in the booth, whom Kevin had prepped 10 minutes ago. The screen flickered. A massive image appeared. It was the screenshot of the approval log. "S. Davis," I read aloud. "Timestamp, Tuesday, 4:15 p.m. Sloane stared at the screen. Her face was gray. "Anyone could have used my login," she stammered, pivoting to her backup lie. "I leave my password on a sticky note. It was probably a hacker. Or maybe you did it. Leah! You have access to everything." She pointed a trembling finger at me. "She is framing me. She is the one who knows the system." The press began to murmur. It was a desperate throw, but in a room full of confusion, it might have worked if I hadn't prepared for it. "I thought you might say that," I said. I signaled the booth again. The image on the screen changed. Now, it displayed a document that looked like a standard vendor verification form, the trap I had sent yesterday. "Yesterday afternoon," I explained to the room. "After the system logs were suspiciously deleted, I sent out a compliance request to all pending vendors. I asked them to re-verify their banking details. This document was sent to the email address registered to Signature Halo Events." I pointed to the bottom of the screen. "This document contains a digital watermark," I said. "It records the IP address, the device ID, and the biometric data of the person who signed it on a touchscreen." I turned to Sloane. She looked like she was going to be sick. "The device ID matches an iPhone 15 Pro," I said. "Registered to Sloane Davis, and the biometric signature, the pressure points of the finger on the glass, matches the signature on file for your driver's license." I turned back to the audience. "So," I said, "unless I broke into your house, stole your phone, and used your finger to sign this document while you were sleeping, there is only one person who verified that bank account yesterday." The room was silent again. But this was not the silence of suspense. It was the silence of judgment. The cameras were zooming in on Sloane's face, every lie she had told, every time she had called me unimportant, every dollar she had stolen. It was all there, projected in high definition. Sloane looked at the screen. She looked at the audience. She realized there was no charm offensive that could fix this. There was no smile bright enough to blind the sensor logs. She started, her voice cracking. "I just wanted to make it nice. I just wanted the gala to be perfect." "You stole $184,000, I said. "That is not making it nice. Sloane, that is grand larceny." She slumped. The fight went out of her. She looked small, standing there in her white suit, stripped of her armor, but the final blow didn't come from me. From the back of the room, there was movement. A chair scraped against the floor. Caleb Vaughn was standing up. He walked down the center aisle. He didn't look at the cameras. He didn't look at the press. He looked only at Sloane. His face was pale, but his eyes were clear. He reached the front of the stage. He didn't climb up. He stood at the bottom of the steps, looking up at the woman he was supposed to marry in 3 months. "Caleb," Sloane whispered, seeing him. "Baby, please, tell them I am a good person." Caleb reached into his pocket. He pulled out the velvet ring box. "I cannot do that," Caleb said. His voice was not loud, but in the acoustic perfection of the hall, everyone heard him. "Why?" Sloane cried, tears finally spilling over, real tears this time. "We are a team. You said you loved me." "I did love you," Caleb said. "I loved the person you pretended to be, but I cannot marry a woman who turns lying into a lifestyle. I cannot marry someone who steals from the poor to buy herself an audience." He placed the box on the edge of the stage. It made a soft sound, a final punctuation mark. "I am out. Sloane," Caleb said. "I am done." He turned and walked away. He walked straight down the center aisle, past the reporters, past the cameras, and out the double doors at the back of the hall. He didn't look back. Sloane watched him go. She let out a sound, a half sob, half gasp, that was captured by every microphone in the room. It was the sound of her world collapsing. Dorian stepped up to the microphone. He placed a hand on my shoulder, gently moving me aside, not to silence me, but to protect me from the fallout. "Ladies and gentlemen," Dorian said, his voice grim, "the Harbor Light Housing Compact takes these allegations with the utmost seriousness, effective immediately. Sloane Davis is suspended from all volunteer duties. We are handing this file, along with the audit logs, over to the district attorney's office for a full criminal investigation." He gestured to the security guards who were waiting in the wings. "Please escort Ms. Davis and Councilman Miller off the premises," Dorian said. Councilman Miller didn't wait to be escorted. He was already speed-walking toward the side exit, trying to shield his face with a folder. Sloane, however, didn't move. She stood there, staring at the empty aisle where Caleb had been. 2 guards approached her. One of them gently took her arm. "Ms. Davis," the guard said, "it is time to go." She looked at me one last time. Her eyes were red, her makeup smeared. There was no anger left in them, only a vast, hollow confusion. She still didn't understand how it had happened. She still didn't understand how the unimportant sister had brought down the queen. "Leah," she whispered. I didn't answer. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I just watched her be led away, her white suit disappearing into the shadows of the wings. Dorian turned back to the stunned room. "We have a project to build," he said. "The families are still waiting, and we will not let the actions of one individual stop us from doing our job." He looked at me. "I am appointing Leah Davis as the executive lead for Phase 2. Dorian announced. "She has the authority, she has the integrity, and as you have all seen, she has the receipts." The press didn't applaud. This wasn't a moment for applause, but they nodded. They wrote it down. The flashbulbs went off again, but this time they were pointed at me. I didn't pose. I didn't wave. I simply gathered my file folder, closed it, and walked down the steps of the stage. I walked out of the grand hall, past the reporters shouting questions, past the donors who were suddenly desperate to shake my hand. I didn't stop. I walked out the front doors of the building and into the cold, bright sunlight of Philadelphia. I took a deep breath. The air tasted clean. It tasted like math. It tasted like truth. I didn't feel a rush of joy. I didn't feel a surge of triumph. I felt something better. I felt light. The weight of 30 years of silence, of being the shadow, of being the fixer, was gone. Sloane was gone. The lies were gone. I checked my phone. There was a text from Kevin. "System secure. Vendor list purged. We are ready to build." I smiled. A real smile. I wasn't the unimportant sister anymore. I wasn't even the important sister. I was just Leah. And for the first time in my life, that was more than enough. The truth doesn't need a spotlight to shine. It just needs someone brave enough to hold the file. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I would love to know where you are tuning in from today. So please leave a comment below and share your thoughts on Leah's revenge. If you enjoyed this story and want to hear more dramas like this, please subscribe to the channel Monica Revenge Stories, like this video, and smash that hype button to help this story reach even more people.